So now our next panel, we're going to be looking at the future of diversity and inclusion. And we heard a bit of it there in terms of what's needed when we look at the future of work. And the future of work, the future of the workplace, is going to be much more diverse than we've ever seen before. It's beginning to happen. And again, the concept of inclusion. This is very, very important. As somebody once said, diversity is like inviting everybody to the dance, but inclusion is asking them to dance. So sometimes it's fine just to show up, but it's also about making sure that everybody has a role to play. So let me get my panelists up for this. And I'd really like to now invite to the panel, if I may, and ask her to come back on stage. She's so kindly been here before. The Federal Minister for Defence Production, former Minister for Education, Zobaida Jalal. So if I can have the Honourable Minister back up on the stage for this panel, we'll be most grateful. Thank you so much. And joining her on this panel, the Managing Director for Middle East and Africa for 3M, Robert Nichols. Robert is in the house, great. The High Commissioner of Canada in Pakistan, Wendy Gilmour. Member of the National Assembly and Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andleeb Abbas. Okay, she's just going to join us a little bit later on this. And also from the World Economic Forum's global shaper and founder of KESK, a green design and construction company in Iraq, Basima Abdulrahman. And also for this panel, the moderator for this panel, we're absolutely delighted to be joined with the Regional Director for AbacusConsulting. Please welcome Fatima Asad-Said.
Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Ethne, and thank you, Nutshell Forum, for this amazing opportunity. I welcome the esteemed panelists. We will be shortly joined by Ms. Andleeb Abbas. She said she's running a bit behind time, so she should just walk into the panel in 5 minutes. So the future of diversity and inclusion. I believe this is a strategic and a fundamental challenge for organizations and a priority for challenge for organizations to address and put it firmly at the governance level. This is an area, a mandate, which some research is indicating that if you have not already catered to the D&I agenda as of yesterday, then you are too late. And that is how critical it is for our organizations to be mindful that diversity and inclusion is fundamentally a core part of how they are driving their businesses and ensuring sustainability and longevity and relevance. Over the last couple of days, since yesterday as well as this morning, we heard very meaningful and insightful points of view from a technology perspective, from an employee engagement perspective, from the perspective of how organizations need to be agile and receptive and constantly changing and evolving in order to cater to the environment that we live in today and the challenges that this planet faces at this point in time. And that firmly links up with the United Nations goals, the Sustainable Development Goals of peace and prosperity and planet and partnership and, of course, people. So when we talk about diversity, what does that mean? For the benefit of everyone here, diversity is about the categories of humans that you have within an organization or an institution or the environment or a nation that you work within. And then you have inclusiveness. So what is that organization done in order to ensure that the categories of humans and employees or individuals that are part of that workspace that you have, or the environment that you have been attended to, their needs, and their desires and their wants and the uniqueness that they bring to the table. So how inclusive are we being as an organization? Being diverse is not enough, because it just gets you to a certain point. It's mindfully, proactively ensuring inclusiveness to what we are trying to attain as an organization is key and critical going forward. So what I will do is go through a series of questions with our esteemed panelists. I will request them to make their opening statements around this subject of the future of diversity and inclusion. We will then open it up to all of you as the amazing audience that we've had over the last couple of days. And then we'll come back to you as the panelists to provide one insight and your closing statement, rounding up, hopefully, very briefly on the valuable insights that have been presented. So that works for everyone? Yes? Great. So I will start with Madam Zobaida. If you could have the conversation and in your opening statement on the future of diversity and inclusion, talk about how it is essential for governments to put this on the agenda as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by saying it's my profound pleasure to be amongst all of you for I think, a very important conversation that must trigger a series of positive actions which are in our mutual interest, whether we are talking of the government or the businesses or, citizens of this country and the global citizens all over. As we know, at the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution, there are clearly four actor pillars of human development when we talk of it: states, citizen businesses, and the globalization itself. And when I speak of globalization, I mean all that it entails in new terms of new production and retail systems, knowledge and artificial intelligence, the 21st century innovations, diaspora, and remittances. Because, being from the government side and not an industrialist, so I'd like to highlight all of that. We have clearly moved now beyond binaries of tradition and modernity. I would also say developed and developing, patriarchy and misogyny. And yet I encounter areas in my country or my constituency when I go and look around. I've just come back from, the flood-affected areas, and I'm leaving again because there's another, as the Met says, there's another sort of a period of floods going to come again. And this is, my constituency is Turbat and the Gwadar, Makran region. So when, the constituency still seems to be stuck in the 10th century with no public goods and services, which is the main responsibility of the government to deliver. But then how can we all, with all this diversity, move forward with an inclusive strategy and try to deliver those goods to, whether it's the state-of-the-art spaces of innovations we're talking about, the industry, ideas, and social enterprise led by, amazing cutting-edge brains that we have sitting here. So I leave it to here, and then maybe we move forward with further of your question and answer.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So there are challenges in terms of the constituencies and the richness of diversity that exists within our country as well. And it is not just about different nationalities, but also the ethnicities that have to be catered to. So that was a fair point. So Robert, if I could go to you, and we talk about organizational focus and the elements that will change, what the C-suite has to change in terms of their conversation when we talk about D&I and how it would impact business outcomes.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Firstly, I'm delighted to be able to talk about something I'm very passionate about. I think diversity and inclusion is something that is critical for all companies and governments as we move forward with the world that we live in today. I'm going to try in the next minute to convince you from a passion point of view why you should support diversity and inclusion. And if that doesn't work, I'll try and give you some figures that should convince you completely. The first thing I would mention is it is diversity and inclusion. It isn't D&I. The words are really important. It's around the diversity of the human race, the diversity of our cultures, the diversity of people within those cultures. And it's the inclusion of those in the companies that we run, and in the governments that we run, and the countries that we're in. One of the key things for that for me is if you want to be really successful, I think you need to understand your customers. Therefore, you need to be as diverse as your customers and include all of their views and their thoughts in what you're trying to do. I also have 2 children, so I have a boy and a girl. And I would be devastated if I felt my daughter had less opportunity in life than my son. They're not really children anymore, they're in their 20s, but they've gone through university, they're both starting their careers, and I want them both to have the same opportunities. So I think gender diversity is a critical thing for all companies. It's an area that we've moved a lot, but we still have a long way to go. If the passion, if the social reason for doing diversity and inclusion isn't enough, if you look at the data, then companies that are in the top quartile of diversity and inclusion on metrics, particularly gender diversity, perform between 21 and 27% better than companies at the bottom quartile. That's in profitability and economic profit. So if you want to be successful, you need to be diverse and inclusive as well.
Thank you very much. I believe it is extremely important for us to be mindful of the next generation as we look at our diversity and inclusion mandate as well, and the equal opportunities that we give to both genders. I would like to point out, because you raise an important point, Robert, that when we talk about diversity, it is not just about gender diversity, and we need to keep that in mind. It's about culture and age and ethnicities, which Madam Zobaida also highlighted. In Pakistan, we have the transgender conversation that is very firmly at and the government has given quite a bit of support to that particular discussion as well. So there are various categories of diversity, and please do keep that in mind as we have this very insightful discussion. So Basima, when we talk about the diversity and inclusion mandate from a cultural perspective, and what are the challenges that organizations have in order to maintain it, and how do you feel that they would better measure it from an ROI perspective?
Thank you so much, Fatima. Good morning. When I was first asked to talk about diversity and inclusion, I was worried because I'm an engineer and I'm a startup owner, and I was worried about the fact that I will be able to voice the concerns of diversity in some manner that is inclusive. But I think diversity and inclusion is a subject that can be incorporated in any work in any type of organization, and as a business owner, I would think, and coming from Iraq, we have a lot of diversity when it comes to ethnicity, religion, different sectorial orientations, and so on. But this is not the diversity, the only type of diversity we talk about. We also talk about the 1 billion people we have with disability around the world, and how are we addressing the needs, and how are we creating the enabling environment for those people to advance in their career, to acquire the necessary skills. So in the future, and as a business owner, when I at some point try to grow my organization and provide some measurable indicators on diversity within my team, I need to get the right skills also for the right position, not just to show some numbers. So how are we as organizations, as government, as leaders in different sectors, creating this environment for people with different needs, coming from different backgrounds, to learn in an equitable basis, so they all have this access to different types of jobs.
Thank you very much. And it is about, you're very important, it's not just about the numbers, it's about what are we doing in order to enable so the right person is at the right seat. And that's a key challenge for organization. So moving on to Ms. Wendy, thank you very much for joining us. And we talk about organizational presence. So in one nation, perhaps it is more easy, even though there are ethnic diversities within a country. But when you look at global organizations and when governments oversee representation in different countries, where do you feel the challenge is, and how do you feel it has been addressed within your own, the framework and the organization that you have been, and you represent the government of Canada? Yes.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a real pleasure for me to be here today and to speak particularly. If you can't hear me, wave from the back. To speak on this particular topic, it's a subject that is very important in Canada, and I think for all of us. I always play a little game with myself when I'm invited to speak on a panel, and I look across the diversity and inclusion issues on the panels and on the conferences in which I'm going to speak. And it is, I think, particularly notable that in 13, I believe, panels on this conference, 64 pictures in the program, there are 12 women that are speaking, and 5 of us are on this particular panel to talk about diversity and inclusion. That's something that I think we all need to pay attention to. More often than not, it is those that represent the minority, whether it's gender, ethnic, religious, or other, that are often asked to speak on questions of diversity and of inclusion. And it's really important for the majority to also stand up and look around and say, who is not represented in this particular room, in this panel, in my company, on my board, in my organization, and then to go out and find people who don't look like you or who don't represent the same points of view and the same perspective, that come with different life experiences. I think my colleague already mentioned sort of there are documented successes for businesses that include diverse representation in their workforce, on their boards. I brought a couple of statistics. And by no means are we perfect in Canada. We still have some significant issues ourselves, but there's been a lot of studies done. The first female president of FedEx Canada, which is a significant, obviously a very large company, has done her own studies and shown that businesses that have women on the board outperform their rivals, deliver higher returns, and are more aggressive about taking initiative and refusing to accept poor company performance and poor company governance. This is in all of our interests to have the voices on our governance arrangements, be they boards, be they the C-suite in companies, be they, frankly, cabinet tables and our governments, to have the voices that will speak out and represent different points of view. We've also done some studies in Canada. The Trotman School of Management and our senior director of the corporate strategy at one of our largest banks, CIBC, is a woman named Ektika Mendy. And they have demonstrated that the best benefits come for companies and for organizations when female, and I absolutely understand it's not just talking about gender, but when female representation is between 40 to 60% at all levels, up to and including corporate executive suites. In Canada, as I say, we're not perfect. Only 39% of all listed companies on the Toronto Stock Exchange have 0 women on the board. Of the boards with women, 55% have 1 female director. All of those companies could stand to benefit from more inclusive participation. I tried to look for statistics about Pakistan. I wasn't able to find it. I would be very interested to know what type of female representation exists on corporate boards and in governance arrangements here. But I can say, and I know we have to move on, and I'm very interested to hear the questions, but there are systematic barriers to participation, not only for women, but also for different minorities again, ethnic, religious, and others, to participate in the workforce. I was lucky enough to visit a Canadian company that's resident here in Pakistan, a software company, Constellation. Its Pakistan representative is Contour. And it was really encouraging to me that in addition to providing amenities for their employees, like lunchrooms and ping pong tables and so forth, they are also providing daycare arrangements, recognizing, and this speaks to the future of work that we've just heard about, that over the next while, the workforce is going to look different. The workforce is going to be, I would hope, and needs to be, better gender balanced, better representative of differently abled persons. And by you, many of you in the room are company owners or involved in business, by creating the space for your workforce to be able to be present, to want to be still at work, to be able to retain your workforce, is going to mean the difference between success and failure for your business.
Thank you very much. I believe that was an extremely in-depth conversation, and you touched upon critical points, and especially the point you raised about the representation on this panel, and where we could have more females on the other end. And this was a conversation, by the way, Asfar, perhaps some feedback to you as well, that some speakers had given, that perhaps more women representation on the other panels from a diversity and inclusion perspective, not only from a gender representation, but also from a diversity representation of different perspectives coming to the table. Also, what you mentioned about female representation on boards within Pakistan, there is a ruling, I believe, by the SECP that at least a third of the, or at least one, there should be one female board member on public listed companies. Hopefully that will catch on, even though there is conversation, is that enough? And we need to do more. But it is a start, and it is a step in the right direction. So visibly on the public sector side, companies are looking out for qualified women directors. And if some of you are out there, please do get in touch, because they are developing a database. And there's so many amazing professional women and women in all walks of life who can qualify for that particular leadership position. So thank you for that insight. So Andleeb, Assalamu alaikum. As we were talking about initially, we started off from the government involvement as well, and we talk about diversity and inclusion agenda. And I'd like you to talk a bit about linking it up with the hurdles that organizations, because you've been associated with Franklin Covey as well from a leadership angle as well, and how does that dovetail into ensuring that leaders are developed and trained with the diversity and inclusion skills and traits that should be part of how an organization functions?
Thank you very much, Fatima, and thank you very much for inviting me on this very important panel. I have a unique background because I belong to your community as well, the HR and leadership development community, and now I'm on the government side as well. So it's been a very interesting journey for me, because as we know, diversity is the acceptance, acknowledgement, appreciation of uniqueness of people. And why I took these three steps is because I think most of us are reluctantly accepting it. Very few of us are really acknowledging it, and very, very few of us are really appreciating it. And so, I want to first make a case which I've been making for the last so many years, and I think it's a journey and the journey never ends. I would like to say that diversity is 5 core mandatory. It's mandatory. Diversity is the essence of prosperity. If you look at nations, because I'm now sitting at more of a government level, nations which don't have diversity can never progress. And when I was looking at the participation of women in the workforce of Pakistan, whether it's labor or executive, the figures were very dismal. It was about 22%. And imagine 78% of your workforce not being able to participate, not being able to contribute, not being able to share. How are you going to progress? And I looked at examples. And I looked at an example because, you know, sometimes people get back to me and say, Andleeb, you're talking about USA, you're talking about UK, they are developed countries, and, you know, they've gone far away and above from us. So I looked at other examples. That why do I think that diversity is in the essence of prosperity? And I found out Vietnam. Now, Vietnam is an example which got independence literally in 1975. So much later. Vietnam fought a war for 20 years. Vietnam has a per capita income more than double of us. Vietnam has a growth rate of 7% consistently because Vietnam, the female participation in the workforce is 73%. So I think that's my first case, and I'm making this to my government also. And that's one of the goals that I have, that as long as I stay, I'm going to make my nation prosperous. We have to deliver as a government. And a core component is that 78% of your major half the world of Pakistan cannot be non-contributive, and us dreaming of a Naya Pakistan which is going to be growing at the rate of 9 and 10%. So that's number one. Number two, diversity is the essence of profitability, and I agree with my colleagues over here because I've been working with multinationals all my life. I've been a leadership consultant to most of the companies sitting over here. And the fact that a multinational performs better than a national means because it's a multinational, it's diverse. It has different nationalities, different religions, different genders, different viewpoints. And he's absolutely right, and I agree with Wendy also, that the McKinsey study says that companies which are ethically, racially, gender-wise diversified, 35% more return over investment. So when we talk about diversity, we have this opinion about diversity that, it's a nice thing to say, it's a charitable thing to say, it's a social responsibility. It is profitability. So the third case that I have, and why we are going to be looking at diversity in this forum and all other forums with crucial focus, is that diversity is the essence of performance. Deloitte study says that diverse teams, any team at any level, whether it's a government project or it's a company project, diverse teams produce 82% more than non-diverse teams. So that's the third element. The fourth element that I want to make at this stage is that diversity is creativity. We're looking at innovation, we're looking at invention, we're looking at renovation. You cannot have that if everybody's thinking the same. And that's why I go back to Franklin Covey. The first time I learned it in real sense, and I started focusing on it, was when I went through the certification of this whole process. Strength lies in differences, not in similarities. And I remember I was reading a book, and I'll share that with you because that changed my paradigm totally. I read Sony Corporation's book by the man who made Sony the big corporation, Akio Morita. And I give this example to people when they come and tell me that they're not getting along with their boss and, they and their boss never agree with anything and they want to leave the company. I give this example to them. I say, Akio Morita, he was the CEO of the company and the chairman was Tajima. And they couldn't get along. So he used to think that I said yes, he said no, I said north, he said south. And after a while, he said, you know, I think I'm going to resign. So he went to his chairman, and he said, Chairman Tajima, because we cannot agree on anything, I'm resigning. So the chairman saw the resignation, read it, tore it, threw it away. And Moderator writes in his book that the sentence that he told me changed my life. He said, you know, Tajima, you know, Akio, because we cannot agree on anything, that you will remain. Imagine how foolish Sony would be if they were paying 2 salaries for 1 idea. He said, as long as you have a different idea and I have a different idea, we'll pay 2 salaries. The day you and I produce the same idea, 2 brains producing the same idea, one of us is redundant. And when I read that, that changed my paradigm. So creativity, and you know what happened after that? So I'm talking about the early times of Sony. He said we had 2 divisions. We had one who made headphones, and they could never get along with the other divisions. We had one who were making tape recorders, and they would sit apart. So he said, I made them sit together. And you know what was invented? The Sony Walkman. Because they were different. Right? So that's the essence of creativity. And the last 5th one is that diversity is the essence of humanity. I mean, we are 7 billion of us, and each one is unique. And it's the emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual differences which tell us that we are humans. Otherwise, we would be A4 copies, photocopied and put everywhere across. So when I look at parents, and parents keep on saying, you know, he should be a doctor. And, you know, at our times, this never used to happen. And, you know, they wish their children were like them. I keep on saying that. How boring. How boring it would be if my daughter would be exactly like me. It's because they're different, that they are adding to a value and adding to the world. And so, you just don't need to accept reluctantly diversity. You need to acknowledge it, appreciate it, value it, celebrate it. Only then you will get the maximum out of this. And so what Fatima was saying, I think there's a whole lot to be done, and I've been talking to the HR community. I'm in the National Assembly now. I've talked to Asfar, I've talked to a lot of you people. I will also be legislating on this. I will be promoting legislations on this. And I would welcome any ideas that you people have of what we need to do. We are going to be very closely interacting with you people. It's not going to be, because previously, human resource in the government used to be manpower development. Okay, you develop skilled and semi-skilled workers and you send outside. This is a knowledge era. The government and people like you need to be hand in glove, because you're diverse. And we need to synergize diversity. So diversity is thinking independently together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that positive message and giving us those 5 elements which really enriches and complements what our fellow speakers have been saying. It is important for us to have a focus which is long-term, and that is what Andleeb is indicating. So a lot of opportunities, and I believe you'll be receiving quite a few emails after this, Andleeb, especially from the HR community. So lots of ideas right here in this room. But just following on to Robert, one of the points that Andleeb has mentioned about leadership and development of individuals and the uniqueness of personalities within an organization, and we were just having a conversation earlier this morning about how do we develop our employees at different levels, especially the middle management tier, and how does that ensure, how do we ensure that they are in sync with the D&I mandate?
Great, and a very good question, I think. What's important to me is when you start looking at leadership and the way the world is going, and I think the session this morning, Future of Work, touched on this a little bit, we're moving away from management to leadership. And that leadership, I think, is much more around the soft skills you need to make a diverse organisation work. We need to understand, particularly if you're my age, that there are a lot of people in the organisation who have a different view. They're coming in because they're coming in as millenniums, they're coming in with wanting different things. We talked, or the panel this morning talked a little bit about loyalty to companies. Certainly my generation, you join a good company and you try and stay with that company. I'm not sure our children will have the same view. They will be much more interested in the diversity of that organisation. And that diversity needs to be through every layer of that organisation. And I think it needs to take in the things you can measure, so gender, nationalities, etc. But it also needs to take into account the core fundamental differences between people. So what are people like? What are our personalities? And there's a lot of psychological and psychometric work that can be done on this, based predominantly on the psychologist, the Swiss psychologist Jung, back in the early 20th century. And whether it's Myers-Briggs, whether it's Insights, whatever it is, if you want the strongest team, you have to have the most diverse team. And one of the challenges that you have as a leader is you have a bias towards people who are like you. And you have to be aware of that bias, I think, to make sure your team isn't made up of people just like you. You need to have that team made up of people who are very different. Because that way you encompass that diversity that you need, that brings creativity and brings everything that you talked about.
Thank you very much. Just following on from what Robert has mentioned, we talk about shaping the organization, and that's one of the things, Basima, you are focusing on in your research as well. How does it link up with the personalities within the organization which will define the future sustainability of their organization? And if we can quickly go, because I'd like to open the floor to the audience as well.
I would simply say, just re-envision buildings, cars, TVs, everything from A to Z. Re-envision all these solutions and innovations and reimagine them if we had a diverse team in terms of gender, in terms of different backgrounds, special needs, sexual orientations, and so on. If we have this mix of team working on building a car or a building, an actual building, how is this going to look like? What features the team is going to add to any innovation? If the engineer, if the team of engineers of this building was, had someone with special need, someone who needs a wheelchair to move from one place to another, it will think, how can a person with special need use a car from their own place without the help of anybody to move from their own place to here and be able to come on this stage by him or herself? So this is the type of sustainability and also the creativity in design and innovation and eventually the profitability of the organization. So we're thinking of all this when we talk about diversity within the team and organization.
And you brought light to another conversation, which is technology. And if, Ms. Wendy, if we go to you, I mean, how does technology play a fundamental role where we're looking at, or we're already there in the future right now, future is now, driverless cars, and you have other artificial intelligence, robotics coming in and dovetailing into how an organization functions. Where is D&I there, and how does technology enable, and where do you see it when you work with governments at different levels?
I think it's incredibly important.
Could you just...
sorry,
thank you.
Again, if you can't hear me, wave. it is absolutely critical, and I think a little bit of the last panel spoke to this, that when we are looking at developing technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, that we are incorporating perspectives that just aren't those of one type of person. In North America, the overwhelming number of software designers and technicians at the moment tend to be men. The products that they are developing tend to reflect their worldview. It's even something as simple as there was recently a study in Canada that looked at the auto safety industry and the construction of crash test dummies, which have a very different proportionality to them, the vulnerabilities to them. If you start creating a crash test dummy that's based on an average woman compared to an average man, or even when you're looking at differently abled people and how do car crashes impact them, the standard that was required never included the requirement to look at that type of diversity. You look at the pharmaceutical industry. It is easier and to some degree safer for human testing to be done on middle-aged men than it is to incorporate women of childbearing age into test subjects for the introduction of different drugs. And what we've seen over the many years is that drugs impact women differently than they do men. The metabolic rates are different, the hormonal rates are different. And so having, if nothing else, having a few different people at the table when you're looking at establishing testing standards, when you're looking at establishing baseline rates, is incredibly important. We have one other study I was going to cite that the Institute of Corporate Directors in Canada has shown that companies with a more diverse workforce tend, on average, to produce 11% more patents, more innovation, than companies without the same diversity in their workforce and in their design phase. I mean, there is no way to overstate the importance of ensuring that you have different perspectives at the table. I like very much Andleeb's comment on Sony that, you don't want to be paying the same salary to the same people to produce the same ideas. I think there is no way, especially in a modern workforce, which is a learning, a talent-based workforce, there is no way to avoid, if your company or your endeavor is going to be successful, to not have that type of diversity and include the diverse opinions in your decision-making.
Thank you very much. And the statistics that you have mentioned are very critical, and it's something that our business leaders need to be very mindful of as they develop not only the organization design, but also in terms of business strategies and what stays relevant. So a final word from Madam Zobaida on this particular aspect of when we talk about education. Now the D&I mandate also works backwards in terms of integrating the future workforce that is coming into our organizations, be it in Pakistan or be it around the world. What can our current academic institutions do or should do in order to ensure that the pipeline, the talent pipeline, is in sync with what the demand is?
Yeah, thank you, Fatima, once again. I think it's very critical, that we need to change or engage our youth into, the kind of diversity, even within education that is coming in. We have to change from the traditional methods of education, but go towards more being in the age of technology and digitalization today. Artificial intelligence is a reality again. We know of robotics now coming from the, being an education, someone who was an educationist, someone who was Minister for Education, and then being given a portfolio that is one extreme to another, the defense production. So when you look at it, there's a lot of educational activities also going. When we talk of defense production, when I talk of robotics and how they could save lives in, when we are talking of detecting mines, it's the robots now that are doing it. There's much more happening. There's a scary feeling also. I was recently in the IDEX in Abu Dhabi, and the feeling of, how, to what extent of intelligence these robots can go to, and how do, I recently heard that it's come to the platform of where actually two robots were talking to each other. You know, that's the kind of scary feeling you start getting. So how do you then, as an intelligent mind, to what level can you actually control the artificial intelligence also, the way it's moving forward? But when I look at, again, coming down to the ground realities and in Pakistan, and then, you know, coming from where I come, where we do not even have the Wi-Fi system yet, we don't have the internet system yet. So how do we include, you know, this kind of globalization, technology, through education, and give all citizens the equal rights? Not only we are talking of gender, but there are certain areas in this part of the country where even male do not have this kind of, you know, opportunities. So it's a huge challenge, but I'll just give you a very small example of, we talk of literacy and we talk of education, and we think that this is the only way for enabling and empowering women. But believe me, that today in Pakistan, each and every citizen has a mobile. And I have seen people, illiterate people, using those mobiles, knowing which number belongs to whom, you know, even knowing the mathematics of it all, by symbolizing those numbers. And also recently we were in one of the villages where, in my election campaign, and my brother was along with me, and we were taking these pictures and wondering how we can, you know, send them over to the city so that it's on the social media. And one of the, you know, woman sitting there said, told my brother, do you know what share it is? Yeah. Share it. And he said, no. I mean, he's someone who's been in the States and all over. So she said, just sit here and I'll show you how you can share it from one mobile to another and how it will reach Karachi or Quetta or wherever you want to go. So this is the kind of potential that we have. Now, how do we bring about these new skills, new developments in education itself? How do we, you know, sort of bring about that accessibility of technology to wherever that person is in this part of the world? Now, these are things I think I've seen the business corporate industry doing a lot of social corporate responsibility, but I think much more needs to be done.
Thank you very much.
We have to partner to, you know, deliver in that sense.
So it is a very important aspect. Fundamentally, education has, and the framework within education and institutions, whether at the school level or the university level, also need to change in order to stay relevant. And exactly that particular point about accessibility on social media platforms through cellular devices as well. It is important for us to be mindful. We heard in the earlier session as well about e-learning, learning through LinkedIn or other platforms as well. So this is something which is existing. And I just read this article this morning about the MBA degree being questioned in terms of its relevance because it has to be more experiential. And business schools around the world are rethinking the way they are framing the MBA degree, and this could result in other disciplines as well, because we are living in a world where there is constant change, and the diversity has to be included in terms of the age and generational challenges that we have. I'll just quickly open it up to the audience. Do we have any questions? We have one right at the back. Could we get a microphone? Excuse me, right at the back, Sadaf. Thank you.
This was a very well-articulated panel. Thank you so much, Fatima. I think we've all heard the business case for gender diversity. We've read about it. In fact, I'll throw another number in. McKinsey has calculated global gender parity would add $28 trillion to the economy. So we all believe McKinsey. So I think we know this will happen. However, we have to challenge ourselves that why are things the way they are today in Pakistan? And I'd like to bring some numbers which are pretty shocking and disappointing for me. 22 million children out of school, majority girls. This is Pakistan. 25% of our labor force is women, one of the lowest in the region. This is Pakistan. 62% of our women who graduate from colleges do not join the workforce. This is today's Pakistan. We have only 2% women in leadership roles. This is Pakistan. And someone spoke about the numbers here also. We are in a state of crisis. And I think until we acknowledge it, we will not make progress. Half our population is not involved in decision making, in the economy, and we are not going to progress as a nation. I feel we talk so much about gender and diversity, but really we need to confront this harsh reality and say, what can I do today? What action am I willing to take to change this? And I have some requests here that I think could be simple steps. And before I actually move to the requests, I would also like to share with you that I just got some stats from someone who was really savvy. Out of 35 standing committees in the Senate, only 6 are headed by women. Out of 32 active committees in the National Assembly, only 1 is headed by a woman. We have 4 advisors to the Prime Minister, not a single woman. 24 federal ministers, 3 women. So the numbers don't look good. And this is the start of a new and Naya Pakistan. And why are women not part of this Naya Pakistan? I mean, I would love to, as a woman, give a lot of myself to the Naya Pakistan. And I think there are millions of women in Pakistan who want to be part of Naya Pakistan and who want to contribute and bring their ideas, and I represent those voices. Why are we not leveraging this talent? It is shocking. There were 2 committees that I can actually point out. The STEM committee, headed by Dr. Abdulrahman, not a single woman. Are women not into STEM? Why are we not on that committee? There's an economic advisory committee formulated, not a single woman. How are our perspectives being represented? How are we going to create those products and designs if we don't have women sitting on the table? I think it's all great to talk about these things and the benefits, but it's high time for us as leaders, as policymakers, as individuals, as Pakistanis, to really face up and muster the courage that we're not doing the right thing. And perhaps it's very challenging and difficult to shake the status quo. But really, if we want a better Pakistan, if we talk about the prosperous, equitable Pakistan, where are the minorities, where are the women? So my request is, please, the 1,000+ delegates who came over here and the CEOs, let's bring women in leadership roles.
Thank you. Thank you, Sadaf. And she's raised...
And I want to add one more. Let's start disclosing metrics, please. Let's start talking about numbers, because that's where it's walk the talk. So if companies disclose numbers, if everyone discloses numbers, that's a much better way for us to make progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadaf. I believe this is a conversation that is, should be at the priority level, not only at the national level, but also within all organizations. So fundamentally, and that's what we were referring to in some of our talks over here, some of the panelists were mentioning that there are steps that are being taken in order to ensure the diversity, but perhaps not enough is being done to ensure inclusiveness of those steps that are taken from a perspective of having the numbers over there. Who would like to have a response or a go at that? You would like, Basima? Yes, and Robert.
It's a very good question, but this is an issue everywhere in the world. And if you look at also statistics of number of women in leadership positions, they're even less than 20%. I think the question, the critical question would be to the male audience we have here. How many of you are willing to compromise your career and become a stay-at-home dad? So the social norm of
we didn't have any show of hands.
Should
we have a show of hands?
I'm going to move on with my with my message. Yeah. So the point is, based on the social norms, it's expected from women to be at home, making a family, take care of the kids, and they compromise their career, and they start getting slower when it comes to development. It's all because they're providing so much to their household. So that's something I go through personally with my parents, especially my mom. I feel we're from 2 different universes. Whenever I start talking about my company and updates, and she's like, amazing, but why the headache? Just get some simple job and make a family. And for them, this is what they expect basically from females. So social norms is one of the things that we need to start changing.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Robert?
So I appreciate we're getting big signs from the team that we need to stop, but there are 3 things I wanted to add just before we do. Firstly, I think the solution is in part of your questions and your comments. Yes. One part of this is if you don't measure it, you don't know whether you're improving. So you have to measure it. You have to understand that the metrics are an output and they shouldn't be the input. I think the second thing, from what I have observed in working in a lot of Europe and Middle East and Africa, is it also starts with women having the confidence to take on the bigger roles. So you need to be prepared to take the challenges of doing that. And then, even more importantly, it's you being allowed to do that. So it is all of us who aren't women making sure that we are looking for a diverse candidate base when we're interviewing for roles and making sure we have the potential of employing women and in fact any diversity. Because if you don't, you know, very, very simply, if I interview for a role and I interview 5 men, what gender is going to get the job? It's going to be a man. If I interview half women, half men, there's very likelihood that it's going to be a woman. So it's about driving that through the whole organisation. It has to start at the bottom because we need to start there, but we need to drive that very quickly.
Thank
and
you.
Then the very last comment I would make is, the other thing is, from a company's point of view, don't fall into the trap of one woman on the senior team is enough. Because 1 is a very lonely number, and you need multiple women on that team. You need to be getting that team up to 50-50 gender balance to get the real true diversity we should be striving for.
Thank you for that support, and I think a round of applause for what Robert has said, because it talks about how gender support is extremely important as well in the inclusiveness dialogue and the conversation. What Sadaf was highlighting, what Basima has also mentioned, the generational views that we have, and what impetus and what momentum that we can actually gather if we partner together. It's not us versus them at all. We cannot see it as us versus them. It has to be inclusive by supporting and giving the respect and dignity that each gender and each category of diversity, whether it's the minorities or ethnicities, deserve. Andleeb, you had a comment?
Yes, I think Sadaf, whatever Sadaf has said is absolutely correct. And that's what I started with. That we've started on this pitch where we find that nothing has been really done except lip service. I totally agree with her. But having said that, I think we need to completely change the way we present ourselves. And it's important. She talked about minorities at corporate level also and at government level also. We have to lead by example. And whether we are it's gender or race or minority, and I'll give you an example, because there are things happening which are different. And by the time you see what you want, it may take 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, but the direction has changed. Once the direction has changed, it is just a matter of time. We are in the stage of war. And there's a huge sentiment across the border against each other. Right? And we see every day how the minority in our bordering country has been crushed. One minister from Pakistan utters words against a minority in Pakistan, the leader removes him, dismisses him. That has never happened in India. That has never happened in Pakistan. And let me tell you, in most countries across the world, you can do a study, very few countries you'll find that thing. It's not, I'm not saying some big things have happened, but I'm saying that things that were never done before are happening at a time when the sentiment is so high on religious spaces. You take that bold step. That's what I mean. Inclusivity and looking at diversity starts.
Thank you.
As far as just one more thing about women. I belong to a party where we brought women into the political circle, but my request to women would also be that there is a process which we have to fight along with men. Just because we are women, yeah, we need to be given considerations, but we cannot shortcut the process. The process has to be followed if you want to be in the mainstream of politics. I have a colleague who's more than men in our party and was given 2 designations more than men, Dr. Yasmin Rashid. She was made the General Secretary of Punjab. No woman has ever been made in the history of politics, of men. And she was given a constituency in Pakistan to fight, which is the most difficult constituency which even men don't want to fight, which was NA 125 of the ex-Prime Minister, Mr. Nawaz Sharif. She's fought it 4 times. Men were not given that. She was given it on merit because the Prime Minister said, ye sherni hai. So those examples are there.
Thank you very much. And very quickly, because we've run out of time, and I do apologize, can they make one final statement
really
of your advice to the audience for such an insightful discussion? Very quickly.
One word each would be wonderful. A word each. A word of inspiration each.
Basima.
One word each. Technology.
Ms. Wendy.
Be welcoming.
Be welcoming.
Nice.
I'd say through education.
Through education.
Yeah.
Believe you can.
Nice. Believe you can. And Andleeb?
Imagine the unimaginable by being diverse.
Nice.
Thank you so much. And apologies we couldn't take more questions.
And a big thank you to Fatima. Obviously, we could have continued with this one all day. I'd like to invite Hassan back to the stage and Ali Akai, Chairman of Martin Dow, if they're pleased with us. And I would also like to invite the Vice Marshal Fayez Amir, who is also the Vice Chancellor of Ayr University. Mr. Amir, you're in the house. Please join us. Thank you so much. Just to give a recognition for our dear panel. Thank you all. And thank you for a really dynamic discussion. Thank you so much.